And so now I'm happy to welcome Candice, who not only has her story herself, but works to ensure others have access to abortion care. Candice, do you mind sharing your story with us?
Absolutely. So I've had 2 abortions in my life, and both were, they couldn't be night and day different. The first one, I was in my early 20s. I had been dating somebody for about 2 months, so not exactly the most serious relationship at the time. And I found out that I was pregnant. I was living in Seattle, so I had absolutely no barriers to access at all. Even the day that I went, the protesters outside handed me cookies, which was the nicest thing I've ever seen a protester do, really. I ended up marrying the man who got me pregnant when I was 20, and we were together for about 7 years when we split up. And when we were married, it's funny because we had decided that we didn't want to have children. I had a stepson from when Dan was a teenager, who I loved very much, but knew that parenting was not something that I was interested in doing. So I lived in Dallas at the time. We had moved, and I started asking my OBGYN about my options for permanent birth control. And I remember going in the first time, and she said, "Oh, well, you always change your mind, so why don't you come back in 6 months?" And so we waited the 6 months, and I came back. And then she was like, "Oh, well, your husband might change his mind and want kids down the road, so why don't we give you an IUD?" And I was kind of frustrated because, I wasn't young. I had been with this person for a very long time. We had gone through a pregnancy together, but I was also married, so I kind of just gave in, and I ended up getting a Mirena, which is the 7-year IUD. And short time after, Dan and I went through the world's most amicable divorce. And when I started seeing people and became more sexually active, I was like, I definitely know that I don't want kids. And I'm 30 now, so I'm going to get sterilized. Went back to that same OBGYN, and she refused to do it. She said that I was going to meet somebody who wanted to marry me, and then I would be stuck sterilized and wouldn't be able to parent, and they wouldn't want to marry me anymore. I went to 7 different OBGYNs in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and none of them would give me permanent birth control. And a few months later, I was pregnant because my IUD failed. And this was a short time after, as you all know, HB2 in Texas had closed a lot of the clinics in the area. I think we were down to about 7 when I got pregnant. So even though I lived in Dallas, which at that time didn't have any clinic closures, eventually we did lose one of our clinics. The influx of people from across the state having to access care because the clinics near them were closed meant that it was going to be a 2.5 or 3 week wait for me to see a doctor for my initial appointment. Because I had an IUD, I was about 13 weeks along when I found out that I was pregnant. And I was working as a bartender, which isn't a job where you get paid time off or sick days. And in Texas, you have to have 2 appointments to be able to have abortion care. So you go in, you meet with a doctor, you have an ultrasound, you wait 24 hours, and you come back. And just getting a lunch break, let alone a day off, was a huge feat for me. And I was so worried that I was going to go in and get my ultrasound and not be able to make it in the next day because I was going to lose my job. And if I did that, it was going to be another 3.5 or 4 weeks. And we have a 20-week ban in Texas. And I was really, really afraid that that was going to happen, and then I wasn't going to have any options. So the person I had been seeing at the time lived in Santa Barbara, and I ended up calling a doctor's office in California, and they were able to see me as soon as the next day. It took me a little bit to get my finances in order. Again, I was freshly divorced and bartending, so I didn't exactly have a lot of fluid cash. Took out a very high interest payday loan to get on a plane. I think that it was about, I paid like several $1,000s for a $600 loan over the course of a year. But I was back in Texas within a week. So before they would have even seen me for my initial appointment in Texas, I flew to California, accessed abortion care, and came home, which is just asinine to me. And I know that even though I had to take out a payday loan and it put me in a debt spiral, and that was very hard and taxing on my body, I'm also really, really lucky because, especially in Texas, you see that there are people who don't have that option at all. They can't get on a plane and fly 1,500 miles away and just go get an abortion, which is one of the reasons why I started sharing my story, right? So that people would know that there are people out there that these hardships were making abortion care an impossibility for in my state. And unfortunately, as goes Texas, so goes the rest of the nation, right? So as I've watched, the laws in Texas are being implemented in other places, and it just is so like angering for me to watch that happen.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all of the levels of that too. I appreciate that. Can you speak to what your connection, the connection between your story and the Jane Doe case might be?
Oh my gosh. So Justice for Jane has a special place in my heart for a lot of different reasons. One, I'm actually the daughter of a teenage mother. I was my mom's third pregnancy when she was 14. And she was actually sitting in the waiting room of an abortion clinic ready to have another termination when she decided that she wanted to parent me. And I grew up pretty unsupported. She regretted that decision, which, you know, does happen, right, for some people, and had no intentions of ever really parenting, and thus was, you know, grew up in a situation where I wasn't really having a quality of life. I struggled to survive for a very, very, very long time. So when I found out I was pregnant when I was 20, that was at the forefront of my mind. You know, knowing what it's like to be a child who doesn't have support, I knew that I wanted to make sure that I was 100% there if I decided to parent, because I knew the results of what that looks like if that didn't happen. I'm also the daughter of a first-generation Mexican immigrant who ended up in foster care. And I also currently volunteer with Jane's Due Process in Texas, providing practical support. So I see these girls all of the time, and I see how much they have to put into the judicial bypass process itself, and how taxing and emotionally manipulating that process is, and how hard it is for them to have to go in and explain to a stranger why they're making a personal choice. And to see them go through all of that just to have their rights taken away again and again and again is so, it's impossible for, I mean, I have to turn off the television a lot of the time because I get so angry. When I work with Janes, it's a daily reminder of why I started doing this work in the first place, because they are the strongest, most independent spirits that I've ever had the honor and privilege to work with. And I can't imagine having to go through all of that and still be denied my rights.
Yeah. I agree, and thinking about the young people that we work with at ICA who continue to go through the judicial bypass process, and it's just unnecessary. Yeah,
the process in itself is unnecessary. So to put like another barrier in place of that is just, I mean, they're stronger than I am. I can't imagine what they have to go through.
Yeah. So you're part of a project called We Testify.
I am.
Could you explain to us what that is?
We Testify, this is the only time in the interview I might get a little emotional. We Testify is a program through the National Network of Abortion Funds that was started by a woman named Renee Bracey Sherman, who also shares her abortion story in the media. And I have no qualms about saying that it is a program that saved my life. I kind of fell into doing this work because I had an abortion story that was a good example of what barriers in Texas do to folks, and how, you know, I had to go outside of my state to get care. And in that, I ended up kind of doing a lot of interviews in media and telling my story through the Holman-Tullis versus Hellerstedt case for SCOTUS. And I had no idea what I was doing. And because of that, I wasn't ready for a lot of the things that happened to me afterwards. I encountered internet trolls for the first time. I lost my job as an administrative assistant because they saw me on CNN. I was fired, and subsequently pretty much unhireable doing low-level admin work in Texas, where a Google search is how they do a background check, right? And I was alone and pretty unsupported. And when We Testify came around, it was a program that was really built to support abortion storytellers and make sure that they have the tools and the community to feel supported and be safe, and also to be with each other, which is healing in and of itself. And also to change kind of the landscape of what you see. So when I first started telling my story, one of the things that got me to do it in the first place was that I was seeing a lot of people who didn't look like me or sound like me or have any, sort of relation to how I went through my abortion process in the media. It was a lot of people who were white, who had wanted pregnancies and fetal abnormalities that made them make a difficult decision in the third trimester. And those are very valid stories, but nobody was telling my story. And We Testify really aims to kind of change that, to make sure that the voices of folks of color, people in the LGBTQ community, folks that are gender nonconforming, are also out there, and that our stories are being heard, because they're the stories that are honestly the most common, right? And that you don't see.
Yeah. It's been really wonderful to watch kind of We Testify
It's
happen.
my heart.
Yeah. And so someone may or may not have told me that you're going to be a part of South by Southwest.
Yes.
Do you mind sharing with folks what that is? Because it sounds exciting.
So South by Southwest is a conference that has grown since I was a kid and wanted to go. It used to be just music, but now it's a culture and interactive festival in Austin. And Advocates for Youth asked me to join a panel, and it's me, Amani Gandhi from Rewire will be our moderator, and then Susan Yano, who works in self-induced abortion care, and also Judith Arcana, who is one of the original people who helped with the Jane Underground in the 70s. So we will be talking about what it will look like if Roe disappeared tomorrow, right? I think that unfortunately, The Handmaid's Tale came at a really good and appropriate time, and is a lot more relevant than folks think. So we'll be talking about what a Handmaid's Tale reality can look like and how it kind of already exists for some folks, especially in red states. Mm-hmm. So if you're at South by, stop by.
Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, y'all, for having me.